In any other space or channel on the internet, talking about the ramifications of tornado false alarms might bore anyone else to sleep. But not here. Having a long-winded conversation about the intricacies of tornado warning false alarms is just the kind of niche topic that I think you all find just as fascinating as I do. Today we are discussing the cry wolf effect within the weather enterprise, a topic that is frequently and fervently debated. And we're going to be doing so through the lens of an AMS publication titled The Cry Wolf Effect, evaluating the impact of false alarms to public responses to tornado alerts in the southeastern United States. And while you might have a preconceived notion about what this study finds, I promise you the conclusion is a little different from what you might expect. To be clear, this video is not debating the existence of the cry wolf effect. It exists, and we know that to be true within the weather enterprise. We are discussing the cry wolf effect's prevalence in the United States in different regions, and how residents of the Southeast might not be as unwilling to shelter as we sometimes paint them to be. Today, I'm going to be breaking this 2019 publication's research down by the abstract, methodology, research, and final conclusions of the topic. After we discuss the supporting evidence and conclusions, I will give some of my anecdotal evidence as a Southerner as well, which will be noted. As always, of course, I do encourage you to read this study yourself if you are interested in the topic, or if you simply want to know more information than we're able to cover today. Of course, I will have that linked in the description for you. Without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to start off by reading through the abstract of this study, so there's no misunderstanding about the assertions that are put forth. Quote, on average, 75% of tornado warnings in the United States are false alarms. Although forecasters have been concerned that false alarms may generate a complacent public, only a few research studies have examined how the public responds to false alarms. Through 4 surveys, this study examines how residents in the southeastern United States understand, process, and respond to tornado false alarms. Contrary to prior research, findings indicate that concerns about false alarm ratios generating a complacent public may be overblown. Results show that southeastern United States residents estimate tornado warnings to be more accurate than they actually are. And finally, actual county false alarm ratios and the number of tornado warnings issued did not predict taking protective action. So, of course, the purpose of this study in its entirety is to understand how residents of the Southeast understand, process, and respond to tornado warnings, be they confirmed tornadoes or false alarms. And what I want you to take away initially from that main abstract is this, that the concerns of false alarm ratios generating a complacent public may be overblown. We're going to thoroughly explore that. So now that we've discussed the abstract's main assertions, let's lay a little bit more groundwork talking about statistics and defining a few things. First of all, we have to talk about actual tornado statistics. 25% of the United States annual average of 1,200 tornadoes occur in the southeastern United States. And most fatalities from tornadoes also come from the southeast, largely because of the dense mobile home population in these states. These are facts that have been previously well established in other research that we know to be true. Additionally, we know that 75% of tornado warnings in the United States are false alarms, meaning that a tornado doesn't happen. Because the southeastern United States frequently see short-lived, low-end, or these spin-up tornadoes, it presents a unique set of challenges for forecasters and meteorologists that are working in the sector who are issuing these tornado warnings. Overwarning tornadoes has been at the heart of many discussions and debates and at the center of many research articles up until this point in 2025. And a lot of this really intense debate really started with the 1990 Plainfield event, which we have discussed on this channel before. The Plainfield event was such a catastrophic and infamous example of an unwarned tornado that it actually caused the plain field effect, or the terminology, the plain field effect, to be born, which is the idea to forecasters that it's always better to overwarn than it is to underwarn a situation and to miss something that ends up taking someone's life. And really, since then, for decades, there has been this underlying concern that there is an overwarning problem, and how are we going to move forward when 75% of tornado warnings are false alarms? It is a major problem. And with the idea and the discussion of overwarning, there's also the call to the general public's desensitization of tornado warnings, which is the crux of what we're discussing today. I will quickly discuss the methodology that is used here. Again, I implore you to read the study yourself if you are interested in the specific methodology that's used. In 2016, 4 surveys were conducted with the same population, including 4,165 residents of the Southeast. These states included Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. If it were up to me and I had the research funding and the ability, I would do like a deep psychoanalysis of everybody involved in the study rather than a survey. That's just me personally. I don't even think that that's a thing. So keeping all of these things so far in mind as context, we in this study seek to answer 3 main questions. The first question: how do residents of the southeastern United States evaluate the tornado false alarm ratios for their communities, the perception? Question 2, to what extent do prior tornado false alarms affect southeastern residents' perceptions of false alarms? And third and finally, how do southeastern United States residents respond when the protective action taken, sheltering, turns out to be in response to a false alarm, gauging how people might react in the future? Let's take a look at some of the supporting evidence and conclusions to these 3 main questions. How do residents of the southeastern United States evaluate tornado false alarm ratios for their communities? What is their perception of tornado false alarms? Quote, overall, the study's findings suggest that the southeastern United States residents may not closely pay attention to false alarms. Interestingly, survey results indicate that the southeastern United States residents found tornado warnings to be more accurate than they actually are, with respondents estimating the false alarm rate to be 39%. It's 75%. They perceive it as being 39%. And this is where I have so many questions about their perception. Is the perceived lower false alarm ratio because people have a higher faith and confidence in modern technology? Is it from previous experience because of events like 2011? Because there are so many deadly southeastern events? There's so many reasons why residents might have a higher faith in the system. And this also correlates with the finding that mobile home residents in this study estimated the false alarm ratios to be even lower. So mobile home residents were much more likely to shelter, and they were much more likely to believe that tornado warnings were real and imminent or occurring rather than having the idea that it was a false alarm. But regardless, the main conclusion to the first question asked, the question of how southeastern United States residents evaluate tornado false alarms, the answer to that question in this study specifically is that residents in the Southeast have a higher belief in, a higher faith in tornado warnings than is accurate. The next 2 questions are going to present the meat and potatoes of the findings that I think you all will be most intrigued about. So the second question we want to answer is, to what extent do prior tornado false alarms affect southeastern residents' perception of false alarms? Results here find that participants' actual tornado false alarm ratios did not predict their reported protective action taking. So whatever the perception of tornado warning false alarms was it wasn't a predictive element to how they were going to then shelter or not shelter. In addition to that, the study found that the number of tornado warnings that participants have received did not predict their reported protective action taking. These results are contrary to prior research that found the exact opposite, and they actually call to the other studies that have opposing results. This is huge because it points to a much different conclusion, not only from previous research that's been done, but also a contrary finding to what a lot of the public perception is about the amount of false alarm warnings and their correlation to how people react to them. I myself on this channel have talked extensively about people's risk perception, and I've also talked extensively about the Joplin event because there was research done after the Joplin tornado, and there had been research done before the Joplin tornado that pointed to the idea that people who had received one or more tornado false alarms in their life had a significant effect on the way that they then sheltered moving forward. The Joplin study specifically is so unique and so eye-opening, and I've talked about this so many times, because it found that people in Joplin were quite desensitized. It found that there were some people who required 8 stimuli before they sheltered, and the stimuli were, for example, the first of the 2 tornado warnings that happened in Joplin. So the first tornado warning, the second stimuli might be hearing thunder outside, seeing a report on TV about a tornado, hearing the waitress at the restaurant talk about the tornado, and 5 and 6 until the 8th stimuli was sheltering. So I've even talked about this research many times on my channel, where we have this researched and perceived notion that people who have been through 1 or more tornado warnings, however many it is, then aren't as likely to shelter. This research is pointing to residents in the Southeast specifically, even if they've been through 3, 4, 5 false alarms, they are still going to be sheltering, and that's exactly what they reported in their surveys. I guess I really have 2 main thoughts here with my anecdotal evidence that I want to share with you all. And my first thought is wondering how much the 2011 super outbreak influenced this regional finding. How much do local meteorologists who have been educating the public on the importance of warning, how much do they influence this? And I think this study almost feels like the hyper-vigilance of the residents of the Deep South during severe weather season is being somehow quantified. This really just proves how vastly different residents in the Southeast are compared to the residents of the Plains or the Midwest or really any other region in the United States. This isn't to say that residents of the Plains or Midwest or anywhere else don't take tornado warnings seriously. It's not to say that they don't shelter. I know that they do. So this isn't to say that the prior research was wrong. That's not the conclusion we're saying here. It's just that we're saying we cannot ignore how vastly different the Southeast is when we're talking about severe weather and tornadoes specifically. And we can actually quantify this finding a little bit in this study. 57% of this study reported as being more likely to listen to future warnings and sheltering during a tornado warning, even if they know that there's a good chance it's a false alarm. That's unbelievable. Almost 60% of people reported, even if they know the false alarm rates can be high, even if they know that it might not be an actual tornado and it's just a false alarm, they were still going to shelter anyways, no matter what. And finally, we seek to answer the third question. How do southeastern United States residents respond when the protective action taken, sheltering, turns out to be in response to a false alarm? And here, the results indicate that, quote, when tornado warnings turned out to be false alarms, participants felt a great amount of relief and gratitude and much less anxiety and fear. And I personally think that's pretty directly attached to the idea that these people's perceptions of tornado warnings are higher. They truly believe it's a threat when the tornado warning is issued statistically, and they truly have some intense fear about it naturally. Now, of course, the participants did say after experiencing at least one false alarm, 44% said that they would be a little more critical of future tornado warnings, and 55% of them might seek additional information before deciding to shelter. But even still, only 38% of survey residents said that they would second guess a tornado warning. So there might be some underlying a little skepticism going into the second false alarm, but they're still going to shelter, and only 38% said that they might just second guess it. This is where the cry wolf effect does come into play. And once again, we were never discussing the existence of it. We know that the cry wolf effect does exist and it is prevalent. But of course, again, we're just discussing the regional differences of its prevalence in the Southeast versus the Great Plains, for example. So what does all of this mean? I have thrown a lot of different facts and statistics at you and a lot of different questions and assertions. The main idea that I want you all to take with you today, and what one of the main assertions of the study is really pointing to the idea that the cry wolf effect in the southeastern United States specifically, please hear me out on that, southeast, is not actually as bad as science has previously portrayed it to be in our region of the United States. So although prior research argued that high tornado false alarm ratios, around 74%, contributed to a complacent public, the previous studies didn't test their hypotheses in the southeastern United States, where the most tornado fatalities occur. All of the previous research that we've talked about, even with the Joplin one, these have all been studies that have had their conclusions and findings based in other regions of the United States. This is, to my knowledge, the only one that has been conducted in the Southeast, which is a totally different animal, as we are clearly finding out. The study's findings really indicate that concerns about false alarms, quote, generating a complacent public may be overblown. They assert that some of these conclusions are quite counterintuitive and in some ways puzzling. And for the scientific community, that really just means there's a lot of research left to be done in the Southeast. I think personally, this also lends to the idea that the inner machinations of the Southeastern resident's mind are an enigma. They do sort of add at the end of the conclusions here that if forecasters are on the fence about whether or not they should issue a warning in the Southeast, they should issue the warning, given that false alarm tornado warnings don't necessarily generate a complacent public, so should definitely still warn it. Now, after going through that entire study, the assertions, the meat and potatoes, and the findings and conclusions, I do want to talk a little bit about my personal opinions and anecdotal evidence as someone who was born and raised in the Southeast. Again, this is entirely my opinion, and I can only speculate as much as any of you can speculate. I have talked a lot on this channel about the playing field effect and the idea that it is always better to overwarn than to underwarn and miss a tornado that takes lives, as the playing field event did. And so there's sort of pushback that happens there, which really creates two interesting sides to this coin: to overwarn or to underwarn. And now we're just adding an additional layer of complexity to this two-sided coin. So now, as it turns out, at least for some areas in the southeastern United States, the overwarning problem doesn't seem to be as detrimental as it seems to be, or as previous research has pointed it to be. The Southerners are much more vigilant, I think. Really, no matter what, you are going to have some people that just, no matter what, will not shelter. Again, we can take a look at the Joplin study where some people needed up to 8 stimuli to shelter. Some people are just never really going to do it until it's the very last second, and that is just human nature. There are other people like myself who are terrified of tornadoes and are always going to do the most when it comes to tornado preparation, as most of you are as well. I myself have been guilty of having the preconceived notion at many points that people don't really shelter very much. I've also had the preconceived notion that Southerners just sit out on their porch and watch tornadoes and don't really go into their basement or shelter. And to an extent, I think it still can be true. And as it turns out, the residents are much more vigilant than they're often portrayed. And if I'm inserting my opinion, I think I personally have a few theories as to why some of the residents of the Southeast might be a little more vigilant than we expected. The first reason I really am just going to call the James span effect. The James span effect encapsulates all of the broadcast meteorologists, National Weather Service workers, and anyone who's in the weather enterprise who is hyper-vigilant about educating others on the importance of tornado warning safety and making sure that no matter what, they are getting into their safe place. The second theory that I kind of have about why residents in the Southeast might be a little different is really from the implications of the 2011 super outbreak and the plethora of other notable events that have happened, deadly and infamous events that have happened in the Southeast. People in these rural areas, even when they're hit by an EF2 or EF1, my hometown included, are particularly devastated. And these states in the Southeast are also among some of the poorest in the country. They also have the highest density of mobile homes in the country. We've talked about that extensively before. And these are tornadoes that are typically grungy, nasty, high precipitation, can be very violent, and are often very violent tornadoes. And I think the idea is that people in the Southeast have that experience to know not to mess with these tornadoes. The Southeast is also unique in its propensity to have QLCS tornadoes, be it from these big squall lines that we often get, or be it from hurricane spawn tornadoes. There are so many different reasons why residents in the Southeast are probably more likely to shelter, even if they think it's a false tornado warning, because they have so much lived experience with these events. Overall, I think it is the accumulation of all of these seemingly smaller things that really tie in to make a more vigilant community and region in the United States. Of course, every single person has a different lived experience. Someone who has actually experienced a tornado is going to be a lot more likely to shelter than someone who never has. And there's always going to be the person that will never shelter until the tornado is on top of them. It happens every year. And there's always going to be the person like myself who shelters for every single severe thunderstorm warning and tornado. It's no secret that I find this type of research, behavioral science, in the community to be of utmost importance. Otherwise, I wouldn't be making an entire video about it. And of course, this research article also points to the idea that we could have a lot more definitive conclusions about residents' behaviors if we were able to have more research and funding into these kinds of studies. I want to finish this off by reading you what I think is the most impactful statement from this entire research paper, and it comes at the very end. And it once again points to the idea that while we have this specific study, there's still so much work to be done. And the statement goes as follows, quote, "Findings from this study indicate that lowering false alarm ratios is not the magic bullet for preventing loss of life during tornadoes. Attention is needed to how policy changes, like access to tornado shelters, improved risk communication, and other factors can mitigate complacency and encourage appropriate protective action taking." So that is the study in its entirety. I went in with some ideas about what I thought that this study would conclude, and admittedly, I was very much blown away by the specific findings and statistics and results from it. I would absolutely love nothing more than to hear all of your thoughts, your anecdotal evidence, your personal stories, any commentary that you have to add to this discussion, because it is such an important one in this day and age. We got a kiss. No kiss.
Kiss each other.
All right. Beep, you want to say hi to everybody? Got anything to say? He's much too large for his age. Beep. That is all I have for you all today. I hope you all enjoyed this topic as much as I did. I have a few exciting things coming in the near future. And the last thing I want to do is to call attention to a novella that a good friend of the channel, Michael Hoffman, wrote. And it's called The Fingers of God. I'm also going to leave a link to that as well here too, for you guys to read. It is such a fun novella to read. I'm going to put a picture up here if you want to read a little piece of it. That is going to be in the description for you if you are interested. I know many of you have asked me for book recommendations within the Weather Enterprise, so this is absolutely one of them. If you want to see more of Blaze and Beep, you can follow me on Instagram, and that is all I have for you guys this week. Thank you all so much for being here, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!